You know, it's always a joy to see some of the first visitors here. Because believe it or not, this is one of the newest national parks here. Grand Teton was just formed last year in 1929. And so, meeting some of you guys, you folks will be experiencing this from fresh eyes, fresh perspective. It's always a joy to meet some of the visitors here. In fact, Hollywood has even heard of us by now. The Fox Motion Picture Company is filming a new movie, The Big Trail, up in Moran. And I got to meet one of the actors up there, a young fellow by the name of John Wayne, that's what it was. Nice chap, wonderful man. I'm looking forward to seeing that film. It just goes to show how special this place is. And it's one of the reasons why I love being here as a park ranger. Now, you folks were interested in my climbing history. Before I get into a little of that, I want to tell you how I became a park ranger here. Well, a few years ago, I got my master's in English and biology. Wasn't really taking to it, though. And I remember in the travel magazines seeing the pictures of the Grand Teton Range. I had those famous photographs, the ones that Jackson used to take on the Hayden expedition. And I wanted to see them for myself. So about 6 years ago, I made a big trip out west. I first went to Badlands, then to Glacier National Park, and I was thinking about studying glaciers there. But then I went down to Yellowstone, and there I met the superintendent of Yellowstone, who was Horace Albright, who's now the director of the National Park Service. Well, one of his rangers were kind enough to drive me down to here, and well, as soon as I saw these mountains, confounding curiosity took over. I had to study them for myself. So I decided I would get my PhD studying the glaciers here at Grand Teton. I remember my first summer even. That was back when Meaner's Ferry was still existing. They haven't built the bridge yet then. I'm very thankful they built the bridge, by the way. That bridge is a lot easier to travel through than the ferry. And I took a train out to Idaho Falls, and a postman was kind enough to take me over to Jackson, and from there I hiked all the way up to Jenny Lake, where I spent my first night here. It wasn't a very pleasant night, though. A thunderstorm came overhead, soaked my tent, my sleeping bag, and myself. I wasn't happy that day. So I went a little ways down south to Cottonwood Creek, and there I met the Kents. They're still living here today as it is. Nicest folk, the epitome of kindness and hospitality for the Jackson Hole Ranchers. So anyway, they let me in, they fed me, and gave me a nice dry place to sleep, and well, Carl asked me, "What are you doing here? What brings you to our neck of the woods?" And well, I told him, "Well, I'm a geologist, I'm studying the geology here." And his eyes lit right up. He said, "Hold on one moment." And he went to his bedroom and he pulled out a garnet the size of my fist. He said he saw this up at Bradley Canyon. And from there we bonded immediately, talking about the mountains, a common feature that everyone loves about this place. And if you're ever in the neighborhood, you should stop by and talk to them. Very nice folks. Some folks weren't as nice as others, though. A lot of times I do my research here in the valley, studying the glacial moraines. And I remember one time I was looking at a particular moraine when I heard a sound behind me. And I looked behind me, and on the front porch of a cabin was Geraldine Lucas. And for those of you who don't know, she was the second woman to climb the Grand. No previous climbing experience before, by the way. She decided one day to climb the Grand, and she did. Pretty amazing woman, that's for sure. Well, she saw me on her ranch, and she was holding a shotgun in her hand. And she said, "You better get off my ranch if you don't, I'll have the law on you." You best believe it, I was out there as quick as I could. And then I met old Billy Owen, first person to climb the Grand. I heard a lot about him up until that point, and I was pretty nervous walking up to him. And when he saw me from his cabin, he leapt from his chair and he said, "You must be Fryxell. I heard all about you. Come on, sit down with me. Let's talk about the mountains." Great man. Wonderful character. You ever had a chance? Sit a spell with him and he'll tell your ear off about the mountains. But please be patient. He does tend to ramble on a bit. So when I was studying the mountains here, a passion came over me. A passion to climb these peaks. Because right now we're in the golden age of climbing. Grand Teton is still pretty hard to access at this time. So not many climbers have come to this area yet. In fact, only a few of the major peaks have been climbed, principally the Grand, the Middle, South, Buck, and Moran, and that's it. So there's a whole world waiting to be climbed. And I couldn't have done it without a close friend of mine, a guy by the name of Phil Smith, who's also a ranger here. He's on fire watch duty right now, but keep an eye out for him. Phil's a hoot. If you get a chance, talk to him about his climb up the Grand a few years ago. He camped up at Amphitheater Lake, a lake up in the mountains. And he woke up early the next day and he saw the Grand from his point of view. He made his plan up to the peak and he set about it. Well, Phil didn't plan that too well, because he made up all the way to a peak that separated him from the Grand. 100 feet straight down, 1,000 feet straight back up. After a failed rappelling attempt, he gave up. And in petty revenge, he named it Disappointment Peak, which is still probably one of the best names, I think, in this park. I admit, I can be grouchy when I'm hiking and climbing these mountains. Phil was always there, lighting me up with a joke and singing away with his songs. He's not very good at singing, by the way, but at least it keeps the bears away. So, when I started climbing these mountains, I have a goal, which I'm almost done with, by the way, to climb every single peak in the range. And so far it's been magnificent. One of my hardest climbs is actually the climb up Rock Chuck Peak, which is the peak overlooking String Lake. Got up early in the morning from my campsite in Jenny Lake, made my way up to it. And pretty soon I came across a field of beautiful huckleberries. And I couldn't say no to that. And I was stopped for a long time eating those huckleberries. Well, I was so preoccupied by those huckleberries, I didn't notice that cow moose sitting right there next to me, 6 feet away. She chased me off just like that. And I didn't have to tell me twice, that's for sure. I moved on, but then I came across a field of thimbleberries, and I am hopeless with that. And I got up much later than I care to admit on Mount Rock Chuck, that's for sure. Mount St. John's a completely different story. There have been many attempts on Mount St. John, not because it's difficult, but because it's hard to find which is the actual true peak of it. See, Mount St. John has these series of ridges going from north to south. And last year I climbed it up and I thought I picked the correct ridge. It wasn't. Found another ridge just higher up west from there. Phil tried to do the same thing a few months ago, and he failed at that too. We finally got to climb Mount St. John just last week, which is pretty astounding because I thought we would never be able to do it. But by far one of the magnificent climbs we ever did was Mount Owen, the last of the major peaks to be climbed. You see, up until then, people have been trying to climb Mount Owen, and they kept failing through one reason or another. And I was determined to do that. And so I had help from two friends of mine, Robert Underhill and Kenneth Henderson, two Alpine climbers, magnificent men. And we've been in contact for quite a while, and we eventually set a date to climb Mount Owen, and we did just that. They came over last month around July 14th. That's when I first got to meet them in person, and from there we set up to Amphitheater Lake. And folks, I have to say before I go on, usually when Phil and I, when we climb the mountains, we bring with us beef jerky, granola, maybe some dried fruit. Kenneth believed in hiking in style, so he brought his personal cook with him. Rick was an excellent cook, and we got up 5 in the morning, and folks, I There is nothing like smelling bacon and eggs up in the mountains, that's for sure. So we got off a little bit sluggishly, but we did eventually took off. It was very difficult, because up until then, many folks were stopped by the imposing granite slab. We had to rappel around it and eventually make our way up to the very peak itself, but not before a lot of cursing from my New England friends. And up until then, usually when I'm climbing the mountains, I had this philosophy. It's me against the mountain, no aid. And I told this to Underhill, and he said, well, that's good and all, but I won't help you when you're dead, which I can't argue this logic. So right up on the granite slab, he taught me how to successfully rappel down the mountainside. That was the first time I ever did that too. So please don't ask me how to do proper technical climbs, because I'm still learning as we go along. Underhill is a funny man, I have to say. When we were climbing, he had placed white actor's grease paint all over his face so he wouldn't get sunburned. And he looked as white as the snow when we were climbing on it as well. Funny guy, but he definitely knows his stuff. While we're up on Mount Owen, we placed a summit register on there. And a summit register is basically a piece of parchment where you write your name, the date of when you climbed the peak, and how you did so as well. And I've made it my goal to place summit register on all the peaks. Woodring, my superintendent, does not like it when I do this. In fact, he doesn't like it at all when I climb the mountains. He thinks it's a waste of time. He thinks we should be down in the valley, which, no offense with him, but I strongly disagree. In fact, Phil and I, sometimes when he's away at Yellowstone, we like to sneak up on the mountains and try to climb them, which is pretty amazing. But there's two reasons why I like to put the summit registers on there. And the first one is because I'm a romantic. I believe that everyone should be recognized for the incredible feat they have done when climbing a peak. And I believe it should be recorded so other folks know this as well. But the second reason why I believe we should place summit registers on them is because I want to understand how people have been climbing these mountains. What are the routes that are taken up to reach them? Because being a park ranger here, you have to understand the mountains. Because even though we're just formed as a park, people are beginning to understand how amazing we are. And they want to climb these peaks as well. And I want to be the best ranger as I can be to show them the safest way and most enjoyable way to climb these peaks. A few years ago, we've had a few deaths already in Grand Teton. And I'm hoping that under my watch that won't happen again. We had a near misses, sure. In fact, a few weeks ago, there was a father and son that climbed Mount St. John, and they didn't return in the evening. And the wife and mother was understandably upset. So Phil and Bruce, another ranger, went up to Mount St. John, and they were hollering for him and calling their names all night long. No avail. And they did that to the following day. Didn't find them. Well, folks, it was a happy ending after all, because turns out they did return the night before. And when the wife told them what happened, they were so embarrassed by it that they decided to take off without telling anyone about it. So Phil's calling up in the mountains for someone that's not even there to begin with. But I'm fine with that. As long as people are safe, I'm happy. Even so, not even professional climbers are immune from this. A couple weeks ago, in fact, Phil and Underhill attempted to climb the Grand, which they've both done before. And as usual here in the Grand Teton Range, it was bright and sunny and clear in the morning, and then the clouds rolled over. And usually when the thunderstorms happen, they last maybe 20, 30 minutes. But here the thunderstorms lasted for 2 hours. And Phil and Underhill were trapped on a 6-foot ledge, belted by rain and hail with lightning all around them for 2 hours. And seeing this all unfold in the valley, seeing my friend stuck up there, worrying what's happened to him, Oh, it made me sick. It made me worried. I was super happy to find him, looking like a drowned rat and all, but in one piece at least. You have to be careful climbing these mountains. If we take them for granted, that's when it will get you. On that note, Director Albright has asked me to name some of the landmarks here in the park. Because when the Hayden expedition came, they only named a few of the large lakes, a few of the peaks, and that's about it. And they also weren't that very good at naming, in my opinion. Bradley Lake, Bradley Creek, Bradley Canyon. Taggart Lake, Taggart Creek, Taggart Canyon. Lee Lake, Lee Canyon, the list goes on. And these were named after some of the men that were on the expedition, folks who only saw the mountains once and never again. And so when Director Albright asked me to name some of these landmarks, at first I thought I had to turn this down. No one person should be the judge of this. But he thought I was the best equipped for this. And I've been doing a lot of serious thinking and pondering about naming the landmarks, because when you take it all into consideration, when naming a landmark, you should consider the scenic value, the cultural value, the historic, or even the scientific value. Take, for instance, the lakes up at Hanging Canyon. Phil and I were climbing up it last year, and we first came across, very high up, small little pool, less the size of this room even, shaped as an arrowhead. So we named it Arrowhead Pool. And then we climbed up this steep area up to a much larger pond. And there we saw a beautiful ram's head skull up there. So we named it Ram's Head Lake. And then just over a boulder field, we saw the most splendid lake of them all. A lake surrounded by these towering rocky cliffs, Mount St. John on the left hand, and Rock of Ages just to the background. And you could hear your voices echo for a long time in the canyon. Such a lake deserves such a unique name. So Lake of the Crags I thought was the most befitting, as the craggy features up there are quite unlike anything else. Phil makes fun of me for this one, but one of the lakes far into the mountains I named Lake Solitude, because you have to hike at least 10 miles to even think about reaching it in the first place. But then there's Bradley Canyon. I wanted to rename it something else, but what? And then I remembered that meeting with Carl Kent, and he showed me those beautiful garnets that he got from the canyon. Garnet Canyon came to me like that. Well, about Taggart Canyon? Well, a lot of times you hear avalanches coming from there. Avalanche Canyon seems like a perfect fit for it. The list goes on. But then there's the mountain that overlooks Jenny Lake. And a lot of visitors, when they ask me if that's the Grand, I tell them, no, the Grand is just behind it. This is a different peak altogether. This unique peak deserves a name of its own. And originally, I was thinking about naming it Mount Nellie Ross. And for my non-Wyoming nights here, she was the first female governor of Wyoming only a few years ago. And so far the first female governor in the US. Very fitting for the equality state. Director Albright did not like that at all. Because the thing is, Nellie Ross was against the formation of the park. And he didn't like to have a name of a person who was against the very thing that she governed. So he vetoed that idea. So Phil and I were still thinking for a name for this. And that's when I was talking to a man by the name of Leek, who lives up north from here. And he has a beautiful cultural collection of artifacts. And he told me that the original name given by the Native Americans here, the Shoshone people, was Tiwanaut, a name meaning many pinnacles. It's very aptly named for the whole range itself, but definitely so for that peak, because as you pay attention to it, you see it's adorned by all the beautiful spires and the sharp features of it. Now personally, I would like to see Tiwanaut National Park instead of Teton for a certain reason. but I can't have everything I want. One name that I've also been taken to is the Cathedral Group. When you look at Nace Pierce, South, Middle, Grand, Teton, and Owen, to me it reminds me of a huge Gothic cathedral with the trees on the mountainside like worshipers. And as your eyes go upwards, you see the many different spires like towers of a cathedral. I love the evenings here because the whole valley is bathed in lavender and rose and gold and blues, like light coming through a stained glass window in a church. And the water always reminds me of a pipe organ echoing through the canyons, and even more so when the wind howls throughout the valley, like a choir praising our Lord's name. When I saw these mountains for the first time, I was enamored by them, taken in by the spiritual beauty. There's no words to describe it. That's why I was compelled to study these mountains and how they came to be. And I always like to say that the true appreciation of a landscape comes when one is alive to both its beauty and its meaning. And for you folks, that beauty can be taken in different ways. You don't have to be a climber to enjoy this park. You can be a fisherman for the trout, or hiking the trails, seeing the wildlife, or just simply spending time with your family. But the fact that you are among the first visitors here enjoying this pristine natural land speaks volumes of how wonderful this place is. And I hope from you listening to me prattle on that when you eventually return home to wherever that may be, that you also tell about the Grand Teton and be like Jackson when you photograph those mountains. Be the next generation of people to inspire others to come and appreciate your national parks. It's one of the reasons why I love seeing the visitors so much. Because everyone's here for a different reason, but we can all appreciate the mountains for what they are. With that, thank you very much for attending my program. You folks have been very lovely. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask. Enjoy the rest of your time at Grand Teton National Park.
Were you a climber before you came to the Tetons?
No, in fact, ma'am, I always have this theory that climbers grow up in flatlands. Was born in Illinois. And actually my wife, Jean, she was from Kansas, and she says, well, even Kansas has hills compared to Illinois. I think that's one of the reasons why I was so taken by the mountains. My favorite part about them is when you see the clouds hang so low in the landscape that the mountains just graze the top of them. Very unlike Illinois, that's for sure. Yes, sir.
What other mountains did you climb besides Mount Owen?
Yeah, so I've already climbed at this point, oh my goodness, done Rock Chalk, St. John, Teton. Teton we did for the first time last year. Actually, the funny story about Teton was that, as said before, Phil and I would try to find excuses to go find the mountains when Woodring is away. And we were on fire duty last year. It was a really bad fire season last year. And Phil thought he saw smoke coming from Mount Teton. So he made the excuse to go climb it, and I had to come with him for safety reasons, of course. So that was when we climbed Teton as well. I haven't climbed Worcester yet. Phil has done that one. Next on my list of mountains to climb is the peak just north of Mount Moran. That one seemed like a very enticing mountain to me, though it's a bit harder to reach because Jackson Lake is in the way. Yes?
Where do you live?
Well, thankfully in a cabin now. Last year, we didn't have a cabin or any visitor center. I just slept in my tent. But thankfully, the Forest Service donated to us a cabin, which we've now transformed half into a museum, and the other half Phil and I would sleep in the bunk beds. So this is up at Jenny Lake, actually pretty near Harrison Crandall's photo studio. I am very grateful to sleep in a bunk with a roof over my head, that's for sure.
What's your normal day like as a ranger?
Yes, so a lot of times I like to patrol the trails, talk to folks such as yourself, fire watch duty as well. When I can, I like to give programs such as this one at the Dude Ranch. Unfortunately, we're seeing maybe about 10,000 or so visitors a year, and I'm not able to talk to many folks or give programs as such. But I'm hoping that as word spreads, I can give more programs such as this one later on. But those are intended to be the majority of what I do around here.
What's your favorite mountain?
I'm gonna have to say Rock Chuck Peak, mainly because of all the berries growing up there. I don't tell visitors about that one. And when Jean is visiting me, she makes an amazing berry cobbler.
Good question. Oh,
Do you think that the park will get any bigger than it is right
I
now?
hope so, ma'am. Right now, the only thing preserved are the mountains, Jenny Lake and Lee Lake. And, well, in my opinion, well, let me just throw this back. Some of you folks are probably, this is your first time here. And if you recall the first time you saw these mountains, it's pretty amazing. Those tall peaks with the sharp drop in that sweeping valley, quite unlike anything else. And to me, having the valley preserved is important, because they're two sides of the same coin, the valley and the mountains. And unfortunately, I'm worried that won't happen. Because recently, as you've probably heard, John D. Rockefeller is in control of the Snake River Company, which has been buying up the land here. And he wants to donate it to the National Park Service, which I am all for. But many of the homesteaders, ranchers, and community here are against the idea. I'm worried it won't happen because of which, but I would love to see the valley preserved, not only for the sake of scenic beauty, but also to preserve the natural animals and plants as well.
Yeah, I'm curious about techniques, methods, kind of equipment you use for traveling in steep, rocky, snowy, icy terrain, because these mountains are pretty steep. So.
Yes, it is very steep, I agree. Well, as mentioned before, I'm actually beginning to learn about this myself. Mainly, I just scramble my way up to the mountains and hope for the best. I don't want to rob you of a proper answer, though. And with that, I will refer to you to Paul Petzold. I've been learning a lot about him. He's a close friend of mine. He's actually, well, you won't be able to talk to him actually, now that I think about it, because he's gone in Ohio right now, but he should be back in a couple of weeks or so. He's definitely the man to talk to, along with Underhill, who I believe is staying in the Jenny Lake Campground at this time.
Did you name Death Valley, the Death Canyon?
Death Canyon? No, ma'am, I didn't. Unfortunately, that one has gotten a bit of a bad reputation, if I may say so myself. A person, supposedly, passed away in the canyon in the late 1800s, and the name has got stuck and hasn't gotten a good rep ever since. I want to change the name, but the locals are against it. It's very similar to Buck Mountain, actually. Phil and I are very against the idea of Buck Mountain. In fact, we want to name it Mount Alpine Glow, because it's one of the last peaks to be shined by the setting sun. A much more appropriate name. But Death Canyon, it's in all the Forest Trail maps, so that one's probably not going away anytime soon.
So have you had many of those CCC or Civilian Conservation Corps boys up here to work in the park?
I'm sorry, what?
So those Civilian Conservation Corps folks that started in the I heard there's a few camps around here.
Wow, I did not know about this. I'm sorry, sir. I am not aware about CCC. I will say though, for trail construction, that I recruit a lot of my students to work on the trails with them. But this is unfortunately the first time I'm hearing about this. I will look into that. That sounds like a good program. Because,
What is the year?
interesting question. I will say this though, is that
That's the reason.
when the stock market tanked last October, I was worried about coming back here to the park, but thankfully we had enough funds to keep me going. I have it set up now that I'll be a ranger here in the summertime and then a professor back in Augustana College in the wintertime. And Phil, thankfully, he works down at Carlsbad Cavern in the wintertime as well. So we haven't, fortunately, been too affected by the economy so far, thankfully.
What is happening with your academic career?
Yes, so I'm happy to say that my PhD just got published this year. The Glacial Features of Jackson Hole. Thank you. By all means, you do not have to read it. I just got my dissertation last year, and it is amazing, and I'm very happy to be teaching at Augustana College. I have a lot of bright men here who want to also continue studying geology. And in fact, if I may go a little bit further, Augustana didn't even have a geology department until I established it a couple of years ago. And so things have been going amazingly well. Well, folks, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much for attending the program. I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at Grand Teton National Park.